Okay. So I want to welcome everybody to our bi-monthly call webinar, Project UNIFY here, and I'm kind of losing my voice, so I'm not going to be talking too loudly or too much, I hope. That's an invitation for everybody to vocalize and to bring your thoughts and ideas to the table here as we move forward here. And so I want to welcome everyone to the call. I see a lot of new faces and names to the call today, which is wonderful. Usually we do introductions. We have a couple of new people, but since there are quite a few new people, what I'll do is just to ask people to put just your contact information in, or not your contact, your just a little bit of introduction into the chat quickly, like kind of where you're from, so we get a sense of it, and then we can get a sense of who the folks are who are on the call here. And when you hopefully when we get into the discussion, when you speak, if it's for the first time, just say who you are and where you're from, and feel free to turn your cameras on. We like seeing your pictures. You get extra points for that. At the end of the day, we'll be able to cash those in for virtual prizes and trinkets. So with that, let me show you kind of our agenda today, which is pretty straightforward. We're going to just I have just really one main update that I want to share with you, and then if there's any other burning updates from folks on the call here, open it up for a couple of minutes, stuff that's going on that folks want to hear about or learn about, and then we'll pivot to Dr. Tiffany Manuel, who will be talking to us about one of our favorite topics around data, but more importantly today about how do you use all that data and all that information that we're working so hard to generate from all our systems. And I'll talk a little bit more about Dr. Manuel's background before, but I want to thank you again for making time today to come in and talk with our group here. And so we'll jump into that in just a minute here. Last week or so, last couple of meetings, I've spoken a little bit about some of the things that are coming up for us, and I just wanted to give you everyone's a heads up that for those of you who are familiar with HIMSS, they have a big conference. It's going to be in Chicago in April. It's a giant health IT conference. I think they're expecting somewhere between 40 and 50,000 people again this year. It's the first time in a couple of years they've had a sort of full-on conference. And we've been working on and off with them for years. And I'm happy to report that it looks like we're going to be doing a couple of sessions at HIMSS, with HIMSS, around consent in particular. And that will be around policy conversation, a workshop around policy, technical, legal, governance, equity, funding, those kinds of things, and try to establish a kind of a common understanding of what are the main opportunities and barriers ahead of us. And then we are going to be participating in the interoperability showcase in some ways to be determined as we go forward with IHG and a bunch of the folks from Project UNIFY and interop community and others who are active participants here. The reason I want to mention this is because HIMSS, as the largest association for healthcare IT, is really important and instrumental in driving the agenda. Given healthcare is somewhere north of $4 trillion of our economy, we may have noticed over the last couple of years, if you were involved with HIMSS at all, there's been an uptake in social determinants. So a lot of the health plans, a lot of the health IT companies and EHR companies and everybody else has really been talking about more of the social care and the social aspects of wellness and whole person care. And so we've introduced the importance of consent and informed consent, given so much of the focus and work we've been doing the last couple of years. And they agree that it's an important topic, and that they've agreed to sort of join us and help put this on the national agenda at a precipitous time where states and counties and jurisdictions are really working to try to build systems that connect and communicate with one another and share their data, which is kind of appropriate for today's conversation with Tiffany, is that It's all great about putting in place systems, but we really need to have in place a way that a way to share that data with the kind of informed consent that is both required legally, but also from a best practices and from an equity perspective. We're asking people to share their most personal information. We don't do a great job of doing that. So this is a great opportunity for us to do that, focus and feature on the work that's been going on the last couple of years here, and obviously work going across the country around this topic in particular. And so what we'll be doing, hopefully it'll give us a great opportunity to have those conversations or to build out some additional work groups going forward, and really focus the attention on national level with our healthcare partners and how important this is as we go forward. So I'm super excited about that, and we'll be hearing a lot more about that. We'll be publishing stuff on our sites, and for those of you who want to become involved or who may be at HIMSS, we'll obviously be interested in talking with you about ways to participate in the events, both on the planning, the implementation of it, and of course, what's going to follow on from that. So, so that's really the update that I have today for folks. I'm really excited about that. And just let me open the floor here for a moment. Any questions, responses, questions, thoughts, or other stuff that people want to share for just a moment here?
Daniel, it's Pooja. That's great news. Are you guys going to be on stage or have like a one of the little booth thingies, whatever they call them, the tables in the IO showcase? I can't remember what they call them, but just curious what that's going to look like.
So one of the, it looks like, you know, jumping into HIMSS conference planning at this, you know, stage is a little treacherous given how much is going on there. So what I think is going to happen is we're going to be joining the pre-conference, which is on Monday,
okay,
for a real focus. And then following that will be the details of the interoperability showcase are yet to be worked out with Amit and folks who are involved with that. But I think we will definitely be there in force in some ways, which will be great.
Yeah, fantastic, great news.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. And I think we've been sort of we've been discussing a lot of these pieces and trying to bring people together around this work, and it seems to be coming together. A lot of open loops at this point still, but I think over the next week or so, and certainly the next time we get together, we'll probably hold a couple of planning sessions for folks who want to dive into it, particularly on the policy side of things. We've done it in the past, and it'll be a really nice, hopefully a nice forum to bring both federal, state, local, industry, academia, associations together to really think about some of these things as the world of consent really starts to multiply. It would be great to get some national perspective on it that others can learn from, and hopefully we'll be able to drive that conversation going forward. Well, as I said, for folks who have joined, if you want to add in the chat where you're from, that'd be great. Any words would be terrific. I want to just say a few more things about what's coming up here. So as you know, or may know, we've moved our meetings to every other week. So in a couple of weeks, if I've got the dates right here, we're going to have a presentation from the May-June folks around the Flutter-based fire assessment questionnaire that is being implemented in New Jersey and Connecticut. Really exciting work going on there of really super modern approaches to being able to really do assessments. Dave, are you on the call with us here?
I am, but not on video.
Okay, you didn't get your hair done today. Okay.
No, I didn't.
You want to say a word or two about that?
Yeah, actually, we just jumped off a call. What we're trying to do is move forward in a reference platform and working with MELD in doing that. The people up at my hand and the MELD project and so forth. So the hope would be that on the 22nd, we would start out with what is MELD, what is the infrastructure. And we just had somewhat of a breakthrough a moment ago where our hope is in the very near future, maybe on the 22nd, we're going to have this running on both Google Cloud and Amazon Cloud. So again, we're trying to take away barriers to move the platform forward.
That's great, Dave. Really looking forward to that. And I think it'll be a really good opportunity to introduce or reintroduce Meld here. For folks who are new to this call, we used to call this Let's Get Technical as a meeting. We're kind of readopting that. Some of the conversations get pretty technical, and it's been pretty exciting to hear some of the really new exciting things that are going on. So we're kind of balancing that out with more policy and business kinds of topics as well. But for our partners who are deep into the technology side of things, making all the visionary stuff actually come to pass, we want to make sure we have a platform for that. So thanks, Dave, and I'm looking forward to that.
Sure. Looking forward to it.
Then again, a couple weeks later, on March 8th, our friends and colleagues from Arizona, Yavapai County, are going to be talking about their youth diversion programs, which is a Bureau of Justice assistance, one of the best practices across the nation, how they're working with youth diversion programs. We heard a little bit about that from Bea and some of the other folks in Arizona recently, or earlier last year, and they're gonna come talk about the amazing work they're doing around this topic, which is obviously relevant for a lot of us, given the issues that we're all dealing with here. So, and then we'll probably be focusing on more of the HIMSS work along the way, as potentially some other topics, some other potential topics. Jackson Morganers may talk to us a little bit about SOLID, and then kind of a new approach that is taking the world by storm, which has a lot of implications for our work with consent. There's some real interesting work going on in California, the statewide data sharing agreements and the efforts that are happening there, some of the other accelerator programs, and then our colleagues and friends at some of the consent pilots, both within Hennepin County, the Bronx, New York, California, and Colorado, who are all we're moving smartly towards actually implementing some of this work, which will be super, super interesting. So that's kind of what's coming up. I wanted to share that with folks before we get to the end here. And now for our featured presentation. I'm really delighted that Dr. Manuel agreed to talk to us a little bit about the work that she's been pursuing for a long time. And I first got introduced, I think you presented it all in, gosh, maybe 5 years ago, maybe somewhere around there. And I was blown away by so much of the work that we do ends up needing to be translated and communicated to to people in the community, within programs, within government, within legislators, and we've missed that step along the way. And your presentation and the discussions that have ensued, and over the years, our sort of interactions really led me back to the importance of really focusing on what do we do with the information? How do we use it? How do we help people understand the implications of it? And I just love the work. I love the way you sort of talk about it and make it real and actionable. And so she agreed to share some of her work with us today. And so with that, I want to turn it over to you. Tiffany's open to conversation, interaction, either through the chat. We'll monitor the chat, but it's great if you want to raise your hand and you have a question. Find that it kind of humanizes it a little bit more by just sort of raising the question aloud. And so jump in. Sometimes it's interruptive, but that's okay. We're a fairly friendly group here. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my slides. And oh, by the way, all this stuff is on the National Interoperability Collaborative site. And so the recording of this will be available as well. And there's some other resources that are up there that we've been collecting over time. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Tiffany, and you can bring I think you got some slides you're going to bring up.
I do. Well, thanks so much for the invitation to come and join y'all today and for spending a little bit of the late afternoon with me on the session. I love the fact that there's so many folks from Michigan on the call today. I'm a Detroit native and have lots of family in Michigan overall. So excited to see some of my hometown folks on the call today. I'll just say, just by way of introduction, that I lead an organization called the Case Made, which is about how we help folks who are trying to bring sort of justice-oriented work to the attention of lots of folks across the country, formal leaders as well as informal folks who just feel like there's some things they want to change in their communities and have the desire to do that, but are struggling to figure out how to do that, especially in the context of what's happening in our country today. We were just talking about the State of the Union yesterday, and just how do you even navigate the craziness of the bubble that we're in on a number of different levels, not just the political, ideological issues, but just the anxiety that people have about their own lives. And so all of that is sort of in a jumble. I think of it as sort of a jumbled set of Christmas lights or holiday lights, right? And it's up to us as folks who do the work around research and information and data. I think all of us are trying to untangle that for folks and help them make sense of it. And so think of this presentation as kind of in that bucket of trying to think through what are some of the ways that we can help folks make sense of it and better connect to the solutions that actually exist. That's the interesting thing about some of the stuff we're arguing about, incessantly, is that there are some real solutions, many of which are actually super cost effective, right? That are cheaper than what we're doing now, but we can't make our way into those solutions in part because of some narratives that are just not helpful. So we're going to talk about that. And as Dan said, I love sort of interaction. So I have a lot to present and PowerPoint and all that kind of stuff. But if there's some interesting stuff going on in the chat, I'm happy to stop and have that conversation, because I think it just bodes better for us when we have those kind of conversations. So I'm going to share my screen. And also, I got a couple things in here where I might want to at some point share sound. Y'all can see that now?
Yep.
All right, I'm going to also make sure my sound is working, and then also want to make sure that I can see the chat. Okay. So great. So I want to just do a little bit. I want to say a little bit about how I got to this work. I growing up in Detroit, you saw some of that in my bio, especially during the 1980s when there was a lot of change happening in Detroit as a community. But I think really it was, similar things happening across the country. I wanted to make things better, and I didn't know how, but I thought education was a way to do something. And I thought data was a way to do it. I thought that if I could just figure out how to get the data and evidence and information to show people that there's a different way, right, to support folks, that if we invested in the power and capacity of people, that there was this huge return on the investment in that. If we could show that return, right, through our data and evidence, if we could show that to folks, then policymakers would have no choice. They would have to say, oh my God, we've been so silly. Why have we been shortchanging ourselves with these solutions that don't make sense? We could be investing in people. And I thought that if we just did that, that would be the end of it. And so I set off on a course of becoming a computer, right? When computers are people. Some of you may remember this. And back in the day, when I first went to graduate school, computers were people. And then they arrived to the university, you couldn't touch the mechanical computers. They were computer labs. You had to go and give your floppy disk, right, to the computer operator, and they would go and run, and your card sorted, and they would go and run it, but you couldn't touch the computers. You were not qualified to do those kinds of things. But I just thought there was something that had to be magical about that. And at the time, women were coming into the workforce, and lots of women were going into quote unquote computing, right? Because it wasn't a very important, occupation at the time, but I thought it was. And so I started to pursue that. A part of what happened for me, and probably what happened for lots of folks on this call, is while we all know that data is super duper important, nobody on this call certainly would say data is not important. We also know that unless those data, unless we have a way to understand those, there's a story behind those, and unless you get the story straight, right, the data don't have the kind of impact that many of us on this call would like to have. And so, I pressed forward with a career in this sort, in the world of sort of bringing data to all kinds of issues, but also invested quite a lot of energy in the social sciences around persuasion. How do you get people to lean into things that are hard when they don't necessarily want to, right? To solve things that are tough. So that's a part of what we're going to talk about today. So usually when I do this kind of workshop, there's a whole bunch of stuff. I talk a lot about what I've developed over time, which is strategic case making, which is just a fancy way to say bringing the science of persuasion, right, to those of us do-gooders out here in the world, and trying to help us get into some good trouble even better. And then I talk about the principles of good storytelling from the public will building perspective and give some examples and so on and so forth. I'm going to spend most of my time here today just because it's a little bit of a shorter kind of opportunity for us to talk, but I'll do a little bit of just kind of context setting with strategic case making, and then go into lots of examples, and I'm going to expect and hope for lots of interaction. So bear with me here. So let me just talk about strategic case making. So I've written about this probably for the last 10 years, been working in my own firm to push this out. Now I work with companies and organizations and coalitions, large and small, all over the country, which has been great. And a part of it is, what I think of this as not sort of communications, I think of it as leadership. It's about, as leaders, how do we show up differently when we know we have to change the narrative about the issues that we're talking about. So if you're talking about poverty in America today, and you think that your data is going to land right where you in a particular place, and you're not clear about the narratives that you're running into, good luck with that, right? Because they backfire in all kinds of ways that we're going to talk about. So how do you help people not just to produce the data, but change the narratives around the issues that they're talking about? How do we build stronger public will to get people to do the stuff, like to lean into solutions that exist when it's hard, when people are anxious and polarized and distracted, right? How do you get people to do that? And especially, I would say, for those of us on this call, when we're trying to move broader systems change, like you all in the data space are trying to get people to interact differently in your own organizations and in your ecosystem. So whether it's the workforce development system in Michigan, which I've been working on with some of the Kellogg folks, just my Michigan folks, but it's hard, right? When you actually have to change systems. Try to have that conversation with average everyday folks. They're like, you got to change what? The system to what? So, it's hard. And so this is a set of principles that helps you do that. And it's especially hard when some of the goals and the drivers of the work are that you want to have a sense of equity, and you want to be inclusive. You want everybody involved in the conversation and in the development of those solutions. It's just tough. So I won't go, I just say, I won't go into much of this, but the book is available. If folks want to check that out, you can read all about strategic case making and other parts of the work. I'll just show the principles themselves. There are 10 principles that I talk about in the book and actually walk people through. We're going to spend the majority of our time in this session on the one that's on the thumb there, anchoring and credentialing solutions, which is where most of that, I would say, the data sort of case making takes place. But I'm happy to talk about other parts of the sort of case making principles if y'all like.
Tiffany, I have one question before you forge on here quickly, because one of the things that's struck me for a number of years was the whole idea of systems change and systems of systems change from the engineering perspective, and really got exposed to that a bunch of years ago with our colleagues at Hopkins. And what you were just talking about before, I think really resonates with that idea of it's not about just changing the individual piece, but the interaction between the various parts and components. And you need to have a comprehensive view of it. And that's hard because we don't teach that in our schools. We don't teach that in, college or generally in most places. It's like, the more specialized you get, the better off, the world has asked for that. And to think broadly across that is tough. And so I just wanted to sort of underscore that's, very much right on in terms of recognizing the complexity and the difficulty of that, but also if you're talking about systems change, it's a steep road.
Yeah, and the other part of it is most people don't recognize quote unquote systems until they break down, right? So you don't think about the wastewater treatment system in your community until you got, absolutely ridiculous, right? The water, you turn on the faucet and you can't get decent water. And you're like, wait a minute, what just happened? Well, the wastewater, system just broke down right in your community, but you don't think about it. Or even during the pandemic, when there was a beautiful article in the Times that were just talking about how difficult it was for folks to get unemployment benefits. Well, we've made it intentionally difficult because the idea is that we don't want people to be on unemployment very long. But now in that time period when people really needed to get those benefits and they were recognizing just how incredibly difficult it was to do that, all of a sudden they were like, well, the system was broken. It's like, no, it's not broken. It was designed that way. And if we want to design it differently, there are some things we can do, right? But so people don't even recognize, right, or right, think about those systems until they need them. And by that time, we're already in crisis. So then we're in crisis mode and it becomes even a bigger challenge. So for those of us who are watching these systems play out and we know that they're not producing what they should produce, it's hard to get kind of average everyday folks to focus on that when at this moment, right, I don't see the problem. I'm just trying to live my life, right?
Mhm. I think Melissa had a question. I don't know if it's
Hey,
okay.
Melissa.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Melissa with Michigan Public Health Institute. Did invite a bunch of my friends and colleagues from Data Across Sectors for Health because every time I see you, it's a treat and inspiring. I did want to just mention something to be reflecting on since you were talking about data lying and anchoring and credentialing the solutions, not problems, which resonates a lot with the work that Dash has been doing in the last year. But also there's a different body of data systems work, I think, over on the Share Your Roadmap and Metrics for Success that, you know, if that resonates with you at all, or you can think about how that is showing up as well. Right now, it forms sort of like two discrete bodies of collaborations that we've worked with. And I don't know if that's okay, like, should it be that way? Because it is in fact a whole, you know, different part of the timeline, a different group of people and stakeholders might be involved in that. I'd just be interested in hearing your input.
Wait, say a little more about that. I think I lost the thread there, but I want
Okay.
to, yeah, say a little more.
So there's, you know, Data Across Sectors for Health. We funded collaborative initiatives that are working to share data across sectors for health, typically around different types of use cases like individual care coordination. But there's also this other type of use case that we have seen where it's more about a community engaged data system or data ecosystem that is more focused on the systems change, and the data in that system is more likely to be outcome data or those metrics for success. So from discussing what those metrics are and then how to quantify and collect that to making it transparent is, you know, I didn't want to leave out the left pinky because I think that that's a really good place for, you know, a place where technological infrastructure could be supportive as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, plus one to everything you just said, and the, you know, I think that sometimes when we are making the case for solutions or things that we need to get done, that you're right, that left pinky kind of gets left off, and it's so critical because that's the thing that allows folks to be with us to understand that the outcomes that they're asking for and needing are also the impact of our work, even though they comes much later down the road, right? So as we're fixing systems over here, folks are like, what are you doing? Do you not see that right here in the middle of the street, right? If you're talking about housing, for example, I got folks like laying in the middle of the street here, and y'all are tinkering around with the data over there. What the hell is that? Do y'all not see what's happening without the acknowledgement that there actually is a through line from the thing that we're doing, right, that comes all the way out? So I think that's absolutely right. And the challenge is how to make sure people can see that through line all the way out. The other thing I'll say about this is in terms of systems is, you know, from a case making standpoint, it's challenging because on the one hand, a lot of the conversation, we're going to talk about this in a second, a lot of the conversation that people have is about how systems and particularly government doesn't work, right? But then so they'll have that conversation, and then in the next sentence say, "But we need government to work, so we're going to try to do this." Like, but you just spent the last hour telling me that government doesn't work, and now now we're all dependent on government. So how does that, right? And so helping people make sense of that is really important too, because it's hard, right?
Idea as to which building is the research building. So I went to the Muriel.
I think, let me just ask people if they're, if you got noise going on in the background, if you don't mind muting yourself, that'd be great. Otherwise, I'm gonna go hunt on the, gonna hunt and shut you down there. All right.
All right, so I'm going to say, so there are lots of principles to case making. I won't go through them all, but I like the fact that we're naming some of the tensions that show up when we're trying to make sense of not just our data, but trying to make the case to folks. I just like to say, and I'll run through these slides really, really quickly because I just want to set a little bit of the context for why this kind of conversation is important, not just about the data, but about the larger story that we're telling. That we got so much stuff going on right now, folks. I mean, just so many crises that are challenging for us that folks are feeling anxious and anxiety about what's happening in the world without an ability to feel like they know what to do about that. And for those of us who are trying to use our data to do some good, to talk about the systems that are underneath these things, to try to bring some of the solutions forward. Right, Dan, to your point, one of the things that happens is all of these pieces of data and information are related to other pieces. And so we've been taught to focus on one of the wheels in the system, right? You go off and focus on, workforce development system. You go off and focus on how Medicaid gets right. But all of these things are really connected. And so if we really want to have the solutions have a life beyond our imagination, we got to be able to bring these stakeholders together in alignment, and that requires a different kind of leadership, which is why essentially, strategic case making from my vantage point was important because I was watching, right, like many of you, the sort of seeing the interconnections between all these different pieces, but having us treat them as if they're siloed pieces, right, which is from the very start a recipe for failure. And so the challenge is how do you bring folks together in these different systems, recognizing too, and you all know this, that folks have, income streams, the revenue streams are different. And so folks are often trying to, whether it's, municipal agencies or federal agencies, they're all trying to protect the funding that comes into their organizations. And so there's always some competition across sectors to figure out like how to keep there. So there's just a whole set of things that are challenging. I actually want to skip down to just some of the challenges that I think are just for us as we're trying to mobilize folks with data. We were talking about the State of the Union last night, right? Right, exactly. How do you mobilize people to action when politically people are very distracted with the reds and the blues, whether you're in the red state or a blue state or a purple state, doesn't matter, right? Just the distractions that is causing is challenging for us. We're just trying to get the work done, right? Just trying to make sure that people live better. As you said, right, providing whole person care, providing wellness, right? How do we figure that out? In addition to that, just the fact that how do we address the fact that people are just distracted, right? Folks got, they like in their daily lives are going about their business. They got, get the kids on the bus, they got to get to work, they got to get home. Just a whole set of things. How do you mobilize people to action and around solutions when they don't have time, right, to lean into what we're talking about? And when the news is, when we are fed a steady diet of anxiety-ridden news every day, like every day you turn on CNN, there's this ticker, breaking news, blah, 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 something's wrong, some earthquake, some blah, 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 somebody is killed, somebody is shooting. I mean, like, it's a constant diet that has become the sort of modus operandi for our news. And what happens when people have that steady diet and they're not sure that they can even believe, right? So one of the things that people often say is, I don't even know if I can trust the news. I don't know if I can't trust it, right? So who do I even know to believe when Fox is showing something very different, MSNBC is showing something different from, I don't know, whatever it is, like whose news do you believe? And in a Medium a couple of years ago, there was a really good article just on, it was trying to make the case for solutions journalism. And it was talking about the business model of the media and what happens when people are polarized and suspicious in the way they are today. When folks are suspicious and they're not quite sure who they can trust and they're polarized politically, when you put information in front of folks that is negative or even challenging, right, to what they already believe, it just backfires super quickly, right? And so one of the things I do in my work when I walk groups through the data that they're using is to really have them focus on what exactly is going to backfire. So we get super duper clear. So then when we're thinking about how we use that data more constructively, like we've got a way to start from that. So I'm going to say one thing about that. When I'm saying backfire, I'm not saying that just as a throwaway language. From the social science vantage point, we study this, something called the backfire effect. that when you're trying to get people information that contradicts the way they think about the world in any way, shape, or form, just based on confirmation bias, right? It doesn't conform to what I think how the world works. I'm going to push back on that. And so when we try and use our data and information to quote unquote convince people of something, we're already in backfire territory, right? In part because the data itself, right, is not really geared to do that, right? And so trying to fight data with data is like nuts. And you see this every Sunday morning on these news shows where, you know, it's the back and forth between, well, my data says this and my data says that, right? It backfires, right? And you all know this, right, from the vantage point of the work, maybe the work that you do. But what social scientists do, like myself, is that we study that, like, what's the effect when you present different kinds of information, put that in front of folks, particularly data, and you try to talk people out of those pre-existing positions. You actually make it stronger. That negative stuff, whatever it is, becomes stronger. And it makes it harder, right, for us to actually do the work of mobilizing folks. So what I want to do, so in the book that, in my CaseMaking book, and I've written many things, but I would say, what I try to do in the book is to really say we need a different kind of leadership, folks, right? We've got to show up a little differently than we have in the past in terms of how we use our data, and be much more, at very least, much more mindful of how we're using our data. And at best, clever, better, right? Especially in how we're helping people to get up and over some of the sticky dominant narratives that are just stuck, right? And trying to talk folks out of it with data is not the way. So a good example of this is just, we just witnessed this in the pandemic, right? You know, we've got, you know, good old Dr. Fauci, right? Trying to bring the best science, data, and information to the table about, you know, the pandemic, and whether or not you appreciate that or not, you know, it was just all of that information, trying to get people to wear masks, take a vaccine, blah, 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 got met with a whole set of very sticky, dominant narratives. Like, we're just trying to give you the science, folks. It's better if you social distance. It's better if you wear a mask. You'd be much better off with the vaccine. It's like, it's not rocket science, but that got caught in the net of trust, right? Right. We were just talking about that earlier. I don't trust government. On the right is I don't trust government telling me what to do. They can't tell me what to do. I don't believe in government, right? It got caught. And on the left, it got caught in, particularly in communities of color, Tuskegee experiment. I remember when, right? The government was experimenting on people who look like me, and it was sanctioned. And so I'm a little nervous about that. So here you have science, data, information that's telling us how to keep each other safe, and it's getting caught in the net of those sticky narratives, which are challenging. So if we don't figure out, if we're not really careful about that and navigate around that, or it's better to dismantle, but if we can't dismantle, at least navigate around those, we get stuck. A lot of good policymaking gets stuck there. So a lot of the book, at least in terms of data, is focused on how we identify those backfires, name those, and then the strategies for how you navigate around them. So I want to do sort of a little bit of an example of that. I use this example quite a lot. I'll use it today, but then I have lots of others that when we get to just talking about what are the strategies for getting around that. So here I want a lot of participation here, if y'all are with me. When I look at this, oh boy, I think, you know, what you all tell me, when you look at this, and this was a research shop trying to do a very good job in terms of just talking about the issue of poverty. I want to ask you all, are we in backfire territory or not? It's basic information, probably like many of the organizations on this call might produce about what's happening, right? Put in the chat. Backfire territory or no? Okay, Mary, I got you. Backfire, name of the problem. Come on, so maybe come off this, maybe come off chat and just tell me why, if you think it's backfire, what is it about this that's backfiring from your perspective? I'm gonna make y'all be interactive.
Yeah, because you're wanting to get people involved. You're wanting to say it matters and this touches you. But the image isn't necessarily going to get the audience that you're wanting to get involved. or feel like they're impacted.
Mhm. Yeah, and what's wrong with the image? Looks like a friendly little boy there.
Right, but it is, but a lot of people have a preconception that poverty is going to affect predominantly Black families or Black children. And that's not necessarily true, although it's disproportionately true. And you're wanting everyone to be involved, and not all white people feel like they are impacted by what happens to people who don't look like them, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It-
Yeah.
It strikes me that the frame, there's so much like information here in terms of the way it comes across is almost like there's some form of predestination, right? Like that if someone is born into poverty, that they can't escape it. There's like the feeling I get without having, I mean, I without more context or without a different frame, this doesn't feel like a hopeful message. Like my donation or my action will impact this.
Right. And to follow on what Matt said, I think it drives a wedge, right? It's like, all right, well, that's hopeless, right? So that's sad, but that's other people. That's not, me. Right. And somebody just put in, there's no call to action. So it's not like you can prevent these more likely outcomes, not inevitable outcomes.
Yeah.
And that's missing.
Mhm. Yeah. And actually, there is a call to action. You learn more. You go to the website, they're going to tell you all about it.
If you go there, and who's in right.
This raging problem of child poverty, and the thing that they want you to do is go to the website. Like, all right, well, okay, that's okay.
To learn more and get more depressed.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
it's done already, right? What else?
So I'm maybe not feeling very strong about the concept of backfire, but because it seems like these data points could support almost any narrative, but then I'm wondering if the narrative that's most likely to support is that poverty itself is the cause of some of these things that, and not the cause of poverty. But so I'd like to, hear more about whether we are in backfire territory. Because I'm just not sure. I can support a lot of narratives with that.
Yeah, so the idea is that, like, is it going to shift folks to, and who's just in the chat, perfect example of that, Katie, or Carrie, thank you so much. Yeah, that it's going to shift folks, in this case, you guys see, like, what's the thing to do? What's do it today. What's the story they're trying to tell? Let's get clear about that. What are they trying to say with this narrative, this piece?
I assume they're trying to say we need to change, we need the situation so that there are fewer children or no children living in poverty. Therefore, they won't have these disproportionate outcomes.
And also that this is common, but 1 in 5 doesn't sound common, as if you were to say there are how many millions of families living in poverty, and then it would seem more common.
Absolutely. So first of all, the data itself is just not very compelling. 1 in 5 means 80%, right, are not experiencing these things. And so if 80%, I mean, right, but a lot of folks would say is, well, hey, listen, that feels like a good story here, man. We're doing 80%. We could do better. Sure, let's try it out. But 80% just off the cuff is not awful, right? We certainly want every kid to do well, but hey, listen, right? Given all the other challenges we face at the moment, 80% is not a bad place to start. But yeah, I think they're trying to tell a bigger story about poverty. And particularly, I think they chose this particular young man, particularly because they want to make the association to say that kids of color in particular are more likely to be in this predicament. They don't say that in particular, but they're trying to sort of represent, right, what we know is true, which is, you know, kids of color have a little steeper road to go here, right?
Well, I think what bothers me about this slide, I mean, to me, when I read this slide, what I see is it says these children are at risk, but
Mhm.
why are they at risk?
Right.
I mean, it may tell you they do poorly on tests for reading and math. Why? What are the risk factors? What is missing in their life? What is, and really it goes to the social care, social determinants of health, family support, you know, stability, housing stability, all of those things that can contribute to a risk profile. So I feel like this is kind of this top line information on poverty and risk, but it doesn't tell you what you need to know to solve the problems.
Right. That's absolutely right. And the other, but the part about it, this, I think they're trying to build awareness around this, but if I got a better awareness, but I don't know what to do.
Right.
I mean, I'm looking at this, you want me to solve child poverty in America today? You want me to solve for kids being violent and having poor nutrition and trauma and having risky behaviors and smoking and early sexual activity and mental health? I mean, my God, like I'm just trying to like get through my day here, right? So from that vantage point, it's just it's hard, and I don't even know where I fit into this. Why is this child my responsibility? If I'm a parent, I got two I got to take care of at home. I'm just trying to get those two to be successful in life, and I'm struggling hard enough with those two. I don't know that I have the bandwidth to take on somebody else's children. I don't. And why is that my responsibility? And so all of those conversations, right, make this backfire. And I'm going to walk through some of the things that are challenging, particularly around this example, just so we're clear about some of the things that challenging. So first of all, just the visual, while it's true that we want to show diverse folks in our work, the way this is done is really challenging. You have an African-American boy, right, in this visual close up on his face, and then a whole lot of negative stuff underneath his face. So if you want to know how implicit biases, right, get driven into us, right, you're looking at it one of many ways, right? That was not their intention, but the way that the visual here does that is really just like, you don't want to reinforce the connection between the idea that young boys are dangerous, especially young Black boys are dangerous, and you just did that, right? It also, because there's no context, it's all about these individual kids without what y'all were talking about on call. Where's the context for the social determinant, the community, the stuff that should be available to this young man and his family that are not in the picture? So it focuses you very clearly on this young man's face and the individual problems of this particular person or family or set of families. It's starting negatively. So you just started a negative connotation, negative conversation with no context. First of all, think about that. How many of you, and I'm gonna step back for a second, how many of you have stopped watching the news as much as you once did before, right? I know because you just can't take the amount of negative stuff, my God, over and over and over and over and over. Like at a certain point, you got to just turn it off. And so you just set up a situation where folks want to turn you off immediately. Who wants to have yet another story about what is wrong, right? And so we know for a lot of reasons, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit, that when you do that, it backfires, not necessarily because people are not interested in the topic, but just because they're overwhelmed by negativity. Like and there's no context to it, right? The data itself is not compelling. So we talked about that, or at least it's not presented in a particularly compelling way. The attribution of who's responsible. So the responsible party in this is families, right? It's not saying government is, there's no sort of government or system that's responsible, or no community. It's like, who's responsible? It's the families. They live in families where the income is low. So it's the families. Those families shouldn't, and you've all heard this before, you shouldn't be having kids if you can't afford them, right? Why do you have all these kids? If you can't take care, I'm taking care of my family, take care of yours, right? So the attribution of who's responsible, right, by default is families, because there's nothing else here, right, to speak to that. The negative data summaries with no attempt to sort of counter some of the dominant narratives about young boys of color, right, reinforces all that. And it's a weak call to action. The call to action is what? I'm going to go to a website. You just depressed the hell out of me. I'm not going to that website. So I want to say, when we think about this, right, at least in terms of how we think about how we're using the data and the story around it, there's a little bit of it. I put this in the chat, this framework that we use at the Case Made. One, we ask ourselves, when we look at this on the top, just on the face of it, what's the story that we're trying to tell, right? What's the story that's being told here? Number one. Number two, does the data actually help us tell that story? And then number three, how are people being called into the story? So you can ask yourself, who's being called into the story? And I don't know who said that at the very top, but somebody said, I don't know if this story would call me in. This is not calling, but once I see, this young man, like, nope, not my son. I'm out of the story. Right? Who's being called into this conversation, and how are you powerfully calling them in? And particularly, how are you calling them in as champions, right? As a strength, right? We need you to do this because you are the one who makes a difference in, the future of our children. Like, that's a story that people want to be called into. But most folks don't want to be in the story. Sometimes I ask the question like this. Think about this young man's mom. When this came out, do you think when this particular, the ad came out and they put it in newspapers, stuff like that, was this mom really proud to go take this to her family and show that her son was in this particular ad? Like, oh, look at this.
I doubt it.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. So the folks that are the folks who are in it don't even want to be in it. Like, that's not a story I want my kid to be in. I don't want that. Right? So who's being called into the story? The people that you're even trying to help, lots of the parents and families of children like this who are living in poverty, they don't even want to be in the story. So we got a lot of work to do, folks, if we want to call people into not just the folks who we think can be champions of what it means to address issues of poverty, which are obviously huge, but also the families that we're trying to help. We want to call them in a way that speaks to their strengths, not what I'm saying here. So I realized there may be lots of mine in the chat. Any particular questions before we go? I want to move us to what we do about this. Before I do that, I want to just stop and say, anybody have some additional things they want to add to this before we move to the how to get ourselves out of this little mess we got ourselves into here.
I have a question that we not necessarily answer at the moment, but I just want to put it out there, which is, in my past life, we used to make ads, and we did a lot of testing with the intended audiences that we were trying to either sell stuff to, or after that, in terms of social services, what the impact was, and lots of regression, analysis on what the main messages were and how they were being read and understood. Does that figure into your approach to this work? I'm looking at this saying, boy, if they have focus group this ad, or if they had even done a quantitative study on this, how much of that feedback they're going to get, and how much of that do we need to sort of? My whole thing for years and years and years has been, we haven't brought in the kind of approaches and analytics that you're mentioning here, but we know from the world of commercial research and advertising, we know what the impact is of a lot of the, used to be at least a lot of the ads.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so that's a part of what how I cut my teeth in this work, was being in a firm. I worked for the Frameworks Institute for a long time, where that was our job, to do qualitative and quantitative work to test out how people were receiving this kind of information. And then to see if we were to reframe this conversation, could we get more folks to lean forward? And so a lot of what I'm talking about in the book comes out of that body of work. And you're going to get, so on this issue in particular, we did a whole series of studies on early child development. And it turns out that you can get more folks to lean forward on issues of trying to solve some big policy issues, and really, right, being willing to do more to advance issues of, family prosperity or, early child development. If you can get more folks, if you talk about the prosperity of the nation or the ingenuity or innovation in our country, right? That the innovators, right? The innovation of our country is based on, right, or the future of our nation is dependent on our ability to solve for this, or the prosperity of our nation is dependent on our ability to make sure that our children have what they need to thrive. Without that, we don't have a future. Without that, right? But for that, we're all gonna suffer. Or the ingenuity message was around, ingenuity and innovation in our country comes from all places. It's baked in folks who are high income, but a lot of it comes from everyday folks tinkering around in their backyards with, right? And unless we nurture that, we won't benefit from, right, the legacy of having a nation that is innovative, that creates, right, that is in command of its future. And when we tested that kind of message against something like this, that talks specifically about the challenges that families are having, or the vulnerable children, or, right, it just not even in comparison. In fact, I think if I remember correctly, the support for policies like this actually decreased when they got this, not increased. That's the backfire effect, right?
Yeah.
That you're actually doing more harm than good with this message, because people actually are less likely to be supportive, right, of what you're trying to do once they get this message, which is not what you want. So we would counsel folks to say this differently. So I wanted to just go through, I'm going to skip a whole lot of stuff here, but I just want to go through, or have you all, I want to just a couple lessons, and I may not get through all of them. That's okay. I'll get through a couple, and then we can talk about whatever piece of it feels like most relevant to the work that you all do. But the first lesson I would say is to really be thoughtful about the fact that data never speak for themselves. So get super duper clear upfront about why you're telling the story that you're telling and what you want people to do with that story. And so when I do this, I walk folks through, I'm just going to phase through that. What is it that you want people to do at the lowest levels of, like, we can seek the information at the top, and the middle part is sense making. So you're going to take that data that you've gotten and try to have people make sense of it. At the lowest forms of that data is just to inform and bring awareness to something. That's what that last ad was about. They just wanted to inform folks that poverty is super harmful, right? It has all these negative consequences to it. If we allow it to go unchecked, here's what happens to a large number of kids in our country. That was that part of it. But if you want people to be mobilized by it and to do something meaningful, you got to tell a different kind of story. Getting clear at the top that I'm trying to either mobilize people, right? Right, means I gotta get them in the story, right? I gotta bring them in so that they feel like there's something for them to do that's meaningful. I gotta help them understand their implications in it. And that's a part of what I'm talking about today. So I won't go through this a lot, but I just want to say that first lesson is get super duper clear of what it is we want people to do because they've heard our story. And I'll say mobilization is the toughest, but probably the most important, right? This book by Jeremy Hyman, they were talking about social media, but I love when they talk about the future is really about who can you mobilize, right? I mean, even if we think about like the last election, I think the country's like split in half, right? Reds and blues and all the other kind of stuff, right? The election is going to be determined by who's best able to get their folks to the polls, period. End of story, right? Right? You can go one direction or you can go on the other one, but it's about mobilization, right? Not even so much about trying to change people's minds. How do you get them out? How do you get them to act and do something? Mm-hmm. And that kind of storytelling requires a little something different. So lesson number 2, frame your data with the glass half full. You will get much more traction if you start in a positive direction than you go negative. One reason is because what I just talked about, which is so much of the world around us is so negative that people just turn you off at the gate. Like, if you listen, I got 1,000 problems I got to solve. I'm a mom. I got teenagers. I got 1,000 problems just with my teenagers I got to solve today. Okay. So if you're coming at me with some more problems, you can just go. I got no time for that. And I want to say that there is a lot of evidence from the social science perspective about that when you frame your data in a way that gets at that, right? People change that. I'm going to send out, because we don't have a lot of time here today, I'm going to send out a video, a TED talk of one of the really probably the strongest social scientists talking about this, about what happens when they've done head to head, like right information framed half full versus half empty. And what happens, right, to folks that people can't make when you go negative first and then you try to get them, mobilize them for something good, they can't make the mental adjustment, right? They can't turn it around, right, in the same way that they can do it when you start from the glass half full. And so it's not even, it's cognitive. It's not even like they don't like what you're saying or they don't like what you want them to do. It's mentally, I like to say, once you dig a ditch for folks, like you really like, the world is awful and it's really bad and it's really da, 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 da. And then you say, but wait, we can solve it all, right? By that time, they're so far in the ditch, they're like, man, I just can't with that, right? So whenever you do start half
empty.
Sorry, I'm gonna send you the link to that video, but I'll give some examples of that. It's in the book too. So instead of starting like this was an article that folks were talking about high schools across the country, and there are like 800 low graduation rate high schools that are just, mostly in communities of color that are just challenged, and they're like, okay. Instead of going there, go the other way. We're actually winning the battle. We've already improved 4,500 schools across the country, but now let's finish what we started by 2030, right? Our efforts to ensure that every high school across the country, no matter where it's located, prepares a student for success and sends them out with an earned degree. By investing in our students, especially the ones who need it most, we can address the equity issues at the center of our educational system and get better achievement for all of our students. Will you join our effort? Here's what you can do. Like, that's a very different conversation. We've already done some stuff. Here's how it's going. I mean, that's essentially what Biden was trying to do last night. Like, come on, folks, we got something happening. Come on, y'all. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's tough. Yes, it's right. But can we start from the vantage point that, right, we do have some things that we can leverage. And I will say you get a lot more traction there than you will in other places. I've been working with some of the folks who do some of the vital conditions work. I don't know if y'all have seen it, some of the folks in Rethink Health. And a part of the framing of this, right, we've been working on this with them, it was exactly from that spirit. Like they started out that vital conditions work with a whole lot of negative stuff. And it's like, nope. So a large part of our work with them was turn it around. What are the conditions for health and well-being? What does it mean to be thriving? What does that look like? Where can we do that? And so you'll see that reflected in their work. In fact, we have the National Academies meeting in DC in 2 weeks. This is exactly what we're talking about. Like, how do we reframe the conversation to say, we got a long way to go, but man, we are so much better off, right, than we were, even just 10 years ago. Let's talk about what it takes to continue to move forward. And so I know this one is kind of hard because a lot of the data, especially in the health space, is it's all negatively framed. How many folks have diabetes? How many folks, right, are burdened by healthcare costs? How many folks, have some other chronic disease? Blah 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 blah. It's all negatively framed, and so for us, having to take this negatively framed data and turn it around can seem really tough. But you have to do it if your goal is to get people energized for action. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? I want to drive that home. Like, go ahead.
I love it. So I love this, on a conceptual level. And my company, Open City Labs, we develop software and around the social drivers of health. And because all of these systems are built, like you said, around diagnosing what is wrong, you need to have something wrong in order to get the care, in order to, get this or that. It's not, the research is more built around diagnoses as opposed to strengths, right?
That's right.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that you can't talk about those things. It just means that cannot be the way that you start. Right? It can't, in terms of the framing the problem as opposed to what the solutions are. And in fact, having said that, that's number 3. There you go. You got to start by telling a story about solutions. When I do training around with folks around this all the time, say, okay, tell me what's the solution. You guys start me out with something positive. Give me a solution, give me a strength, give me a system. Let's start there. But you never start, right, or never lead with the stuff that's negative. Start with the stuff that makes me hopeful that something can get better. That's the high value impact. That makes me feel like right? I'm joining a winning team here. Nobody wants to join a losing team. I want to join the team that feels like it's got some energy. Yeah, right. So start with something like that, and I often give things like this. So this is just a good example. Ending poverty is within our reach, right? We can do it. 1 billion people on the planet, so we get the numbers of who's living under poverty. We got at the bottom here, where do they live, right, across the country. We got across, we know who, how do we get there? How do we end poverty, right? And there's some inclusive growth, and we know what that means. Access to services, job creation, help for the most vulnerable. When do we get there, right? Where we can chart it out. We can get there by 2030, right? And then take on what you can do. Not everybody can do everything, but take on what you can change, right? They can be small changes that you're taking on or issues, but take on what you can. But we can do this. Here's who it is. Here's how you do it. Here's when we can do it, how you can change it. Now, listen, folks, there are a lot of folks who still be skeptical, but this is a hell of a lot better message in terms of making me feel like there's something happening that I can join that might be determined by something, as opposed to saying, showing me the picture of a young man and all of the folks, right, and all the things that are wrong with him, right? I was going to say a climate change. I'll do it differently. How about this one? I'll share. Can you all see this? I'll do a data store. Here's an example of that.
To those who think gender equality only benefits girls, the numbers tell a different story. If US companies hired and promoted women at the same rate as countries like Norway, the economy could grow by 8%. Around the world, gender-diverse companies are 15% likelier to earn more than their competitors. And just by adding more women to the workforce, the global GDP could go up by 26%. In India alone, women could grow the economy by up to 60%. And in the last 20 years, the revenue of women-owned US companies has increased by 103%. Yeah, it pays for us to have a bigger piece of the pie.
Yeah, that's a very different data story. Now, they could have started the story very differently. Around the world, right, women and girls are not valued, right? Around the world, it's really tough for girls to get educated. Around the world, it's tough, even in quote unquote developed countries, right? There's a huge disparity between women who are CEOs, women who get access to technical careers. They could have told that story, and it would have been a good story to tell. The problem is you just won't motivate anybody to feel good about like what's happening and say like, all right, what can I do? Like, they started out from a solutions-based approach from the whole time. And one of the other principles of strategic case making is they put you in the future, right? You got all these young women and you're thinking about what's the future of these young women, right? And so again, the aspiration is like, okay, all right, right? Makes you feel like this can really happen, as opposed to depressed by what we see in terms of gender inequality. So I have lots of examples, and we don't have time to go through them today, but I just wanted to share just a couple of those like that can be really, that can help you see some of those. Same thing on the left side, you can talk all day long about childhood obesity and all the stuff that's wrong with it and what it takes, or you can start talking about the solutions that matter. And I will say, I'm on the Kaboom board, but again, like the solution, a part of the solution is play. Like, here's what's happening. The kids that we're talking about that are more likely to experience childhood obesity are the ones who don't have access to playtime, right? The kids who, right, the inequality around just having spaces to move their bodies. So what do we want to do? Listen, we want to make sure that we're building more of these spaces and protecting them for kids. And by the way, we can tell you more about that, right? So you want to get people anchored in the conversation about solutions. How do we do it? How much does it cost? What does it take? How long does it take? As opposed to the conversation on the left, which is how many kids are, like, right? You don't want to get people stuck in trying to define the problem. You want to get them stuck or anchored, right? And what it takes to move forward. So I have lots more examples. I won't go through them all, but any thoughts about that one? Getting people, you want to get people anchored in those solutions and strengths and systems change early on, And it doesn't mean you can't talk about the challenges. It just means, man, don't turn them away and get them stuck before you actually get them energized for something better. Does that make sense?
Very inspiring. It's interesting that in the chat here, Paul put a very interesting thought about even the image in the first one. I was just sort of imagining that. He said, you know, what if you put the kid in a cap and gown, right? Like this is the to-be state versus where he came from, you know, just
love it.
Right?
Yes. 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 And put a statement like that. When we invest in the power and capacity of all of our children, right? We're investing in the future that we want, right? Whatever that is. And you can say whatever statement is, but man, that's a hell of a lot more hopeful. And that's the thing. The mom wants to show their neighbors, hey, look at my kid. Mark was in this thing. Look, a cap and gown. Like, wow. Right?
Yeah, sure.
I want to be in that story.
Yeah.
You still share the data, right? And you can, right? But the notion is that it's certainly a hell of a lot more inspiring than what you got. Here's some more examples of that. On one hand, in Florida, our babies are dying from data to action, a review of all the infant deaths in Northeast Florida, as opposed to healthy, prosperous communities are built one baby at a time. What does it take to keep our babies strong? Right? That's a very different. I want to come to the conversation on the right. I want no part of the one on the left. I just don't, right? Yeah. So I'll go through a few of these. So data lesson number 4, maybe I just do 4. I have 7 lessons, but I'll give you 4 and then we'll stop and just talk about some of the implications for our data. But number 4 is trying to get people to think about the possibility of change. This is a recognition that one of the biggest impediments to action is that people just don't think that change is possible. When you ask people, do you think we can solve homelessness? No. Oh man, get out of here. Do you think we can actually ever get to a point where we've solved for poverty? There's no kid that's poor. No, get out of here, man. They just don't think anything is possible. So even if you got great data and like, man, like you want to encourage folks, that the sort of defeatism just meets you at the door, right? So, and especially if you start with all that negative data. So you start with all the negative stuff, and then you try to convince people that something is possible, right? And then go very far. So the idea is to start to give folks some idea that actually something is actually possible, right? And you can do that with your data. This was something put out by actually the National Academies for Medicine, put this out about 2 years ago, I guess, to talk about the changes that we need in the healthcare system. And so when they talk to healthcare leaders in hospitals and administrators, they was like, oh, we can't do it. We can't do it. And so they put this out to show actually in other industries, it happens all the time. It's not rocket science, folks. So on the left, information technology, folks were saying, no, we can't make patient, records available to every person. It's just too much. And it's sensitive information. And so they said, actually, online banking is incredibly sensitive information with transactions and all this kind of stuff, but we've managed to figure that out. So hello. Or the other one, transparency. They said, no, we can't make this stuff transparent. We can't, figure out how to get people access to the price of medicines and tests. And they said, well, actually, we do that all the time. Like before shopping for an appliance or hotels or whatever, you can compare prices online. It happens every day. Like there's no, they did more. They talked about, managing complexity. Like there's so many pieces in the healthcare system. We can't possibly kind of figure out how to coordinate that. Manufacturers do it all the time. Like, here you go. Here's the data for it. We have it. Or safety issues. People say, well, you can't improve safety because it's just too hard to figure out safety data in terms of, well, the aviation industry does it all the time. When there's a crash, right? There's a whole conversation about what happened. The industry comes together to figure out how to avoid that so it never happens again. And they put regulations in place to deal with that. So we don't have planes flying out of the sky every 5 minutes. So if you want to talk about maternal deaths and why more African-American women are dying in the, right? When it's supposed to be the most important part of their lives, we could actually figure that out. They do it every day in the aviation industry. So again, the point of this was just for them to say, it's possible, folks. Let's not have all this stuff that's in the healthcare space outside of the realm of possibility. So use your data and information to help you do that, right? Here's another one. We're talking about homelessness. The one on the left was they was talking about homelessness and with all the money that it costs. If you don't have housing for folks, they go to jail a lot, they go to hospitals a lot. It's expensive for us to manage folks who are on the street and not doing well and are homeless. And on the right, this was an article in Huffington Post. You know, we could actually end homelessness without just the money that we spend on holiday decorations. Like we literally, like we could do that. Like if you stop buying the ornaments just for one year, we could do this, folks. And now, granted, they didn't expect people to actually not go and buy decorations, but they just wanted people to get out of the conversation that it's not possible. It actually is, and it's not even that hard. Like you could say, with just the paper towel budget, right, of our municipal staff, we could probably solve a whole hell of a lot of stuff. Do we want you to stop using paper towel? No. However, if I got a choice between the paper towel and solving homelessness, I'm kind of leaning on the homelessness side of things, right? So you just want to get people out of it. And that's a great use of our data because it forces folks to sort of untangle or I'd say disconnect to some of the narratives that we've told ourselves. I have a lot more to show. I got a lot more examples on my show, but I'm going to stop there. And I'm going to say, on this last point about possibilities, I just want to say, you know, we just went through this incredible period of possibility, right? Where a lot of the common narratives that we told ourselves about what's possible and not just got completely demolished. And I would say that was during the pandemic. People said, oh, government can't act fast. Government is super slow. You can't depend on government to do anything. Well, I think a part of, you know, during the pandemic, the Congress voted like on a Thursday to approve surplus benefits. And by Tuesday, they started showing up in people's bank accounts. Like, wait, what happened? Government was so slow, but all of a sudden we can, right? Or they were talking about, we can't solve homelessness, it's too much. When the pandemic happened, a lot of jurisdictions bought up rooms at local motels and hotels so that folks could get housed. Right? Got all these folks or a lot of folks off the street overnight. Like, wait a minute, how did that happen? We couldn't do it. And all of a sudden, like the pandemic happens and there we are, right? Or even the vaccine, like you can't develop a vaccine, it takes 10 years and blah, 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 blah. Now, I listen, I'm not verifying the legitimacy of a vaccine, but I'm just saying, right? We had a vaccine developed under a Republican president, implemented under a Democratic president, right? In record time and delivered. We delivered almost 300 million doses of a vaccine. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but in Florida where I live, people, they opened up the convention center and I mean, like you just drove through, cars were coming through, you put your arm out the window, they gave you a shot and you kept going, right? People said we couldn't do it. 300 doses like that. Our healthcare system, super fast, super quick, delivering, right, what it needed to do. So a lot of the narratives about what's not possible, we can't do it, we're too slow, blah, 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 got demolished in a very short amount of time. And that was helpful, right? To talk about that in that context about all the things that happened, right? Not everything happened perfectly, but a lot got done. And what if that was the conversation? Even the partisanship stuff, you know, right? We had US, like the vaccine developed under a Republican administration, delivered on a Democratic one, with the coordination of a whole lot of our corporations, right? Acting in tandem, in conversation and in partnership with our healthcare industries. My God, if that's not a compelling story about what our possibilities are, I don't know, right? I don't know what is, right? That's a huge win for us. What if we were starting the conversation there to say, no, it wasn't perfect. No, it wasn't, right? We have to go a lot further, but my God, can we start there, right? So I want to stop there. I think that's that third principle is what if you started with and use your data to talk about the possibility. If we can do it here, right? Yep, we can do it here. How do we move in that direction? So I'll stop there. Hope that's helpful for folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, Tiffany, while people are pondering, there are a couple of things in the chat. One of the questions I had is, you know, relative to sort of legislators and whether or not in your work you've seen or thought about does that same message resonate, or does the message resonate the same with people who are making, political decisions in legislative bodies, as opposed to, consumers or, opinion makers or whatever, news people, and whether or not that is a strategy that is useful. This approach is useful there as well.
Yeah, great question. And so what works are the principles, even if the conversation may need to be different, right? So the principle in those 10 fingers, and first principle is you always start by speaking to the aspirations of the folks you're talking to. So who am I talking to? I'm talking to a legislator. Let me talk about your aspirations, right? What is it that you're trying to get done here, right? That maps onto what we're trying to get done as well. And is there a common ground, a shared connection that we can start with, right? That's much more aspirational. And you can use data to help you do that. But the main point is it's the aspiration of who you're talking to. And so if you're talking to a group of community residents who want doulas, right, who want access to doulas in their community because they think it may help, address some of the issues around, maternal mortality, that may be a different conversation than if you're talking to legislators about the same, or hospital administrators. But the principle itself of what you got to get out of the gate in those conversations remains the same. And so when I do workshops and things with folks, we nail down the principle, like sometimes even for legislative visits, when folks are going to city council meetings or whatever, I have them write on their hands, like at least the first 3 principles, which we call the hook, write on your hands. So if you forget, you're right, and you got comments coming back, you're like, okay, here's what I got to do. I got to get aspirations in this conversation immediately. Then I got to get urgency, and I got to get a sense of agency. And then my third principle is I got to tell them, right, I got to remind them of what they're going to lose if they don't lean forward. So we didn't have a chance to go through the full set of principles. Yeah. But you can see that the consistency of getting really good at that is really important, and what helps you sort of make that case. Mm-hmm. Thoughts, questions, observations? I'll take them all.
So Tiffany, I have a question. Most of us we're in this group because our interest is in bringing silos of data together. So we're interested in, interoperability, interoptimability, and, dare I say, sort of the intersectionality of data, right? So I just wondered what thoughts you have about that, because I think, there's the data communication once you have it. I think a lot of us feel like we're stuck because we have incomplete data, right? So our big goal is to try to get the big picture, to get a more full, a more complete picture of actionable data. So that we can tell a better story with our data. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts or experiences related to that, the sort of the issue of kind of incomplete data, or what happens when you kind of bring together data from different sources that maybe doesn't match up quite completely perfectly. How do you kind of make that work and still use it to achieve the objectives that you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, so a lot of it has to do with who do you need to make that case to. So, right, it's who needs complete data but doesn't know it or is not recognizing it. Like, who benefits from having a more complete data set, and how do we make the case to them to be stakeholders to move this forward? And so when they're understanding of what they're losing out on because we don't have complete data, and they get that is actually, we're losing out on some big, right? And when you can make that case, then you get folks to lean forward and even get over some of their narratives about we can't do this, it's about privacy, it's about this, it's about blah, 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 whatever those narratives are. They can get over that, but they got to understand that they're losing something, right, by not moving or by not aligning themselves with what y'all are trying to do. And so that case about loss, I will say to you, and sometimes I do a whole section on this when I do the whole full principles. Loss aversion is the basis of all of behavioral economics, right? It literally is this idea that people don't want to lose anything, right? It is not only, and the reason it's the central node in all of behavioral economics because of what we know about human behavior, which is loss aversion is the single dominating force in all of human decision making, period. Right? People make the calculation that do I go, no go, well, that depends on, right? Am I going to lose something? It's not about am I going to gain something? It's am I going to lose something? And if you can make the case that it's the loss, right? It's the loss. People go to bed at night concerned about loss. They don't go to bed at night because of what they think they might gain. They go to bed and they sleep well. But when you tell somebody, right, every day that we don't have complete data about what's happening in our community, here's what's happening. Every single day, here's what's happening. Every single day, this institution or organization doesn't know enough about the folks that we're serving or the folk, right? Every single day, we're losing 25% of revenue, 25% of lives, 25, whatever it is. Now, every day, now you're about to have a different conversation, right, with those folks who are holding back on data because they're losing, and then they get nervous about what they're losing, and now you can have a different conversation. So
great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think a good example of that is some of the, I'm a family doctor, so one of the big things is kids and missing school because of asthma, right? And so if the kid comes in and you ask the parents, oh, how are they doing with their asthma? And the parents say, oh, okay, but you have no data from the school, right? You don't know, they just missed, 7 days of school in the last quarter because of their asthma. You don't take the same action on that child's behalf as you would if you had that kind of data. And so we're seeing, where schools are willing to work with the important privacy restrictions that they have in place with healthcare providers to share that kind of data to make those kind of changes. So I think you're right.
yeah, absolutely. Love it.
I have one more sort of question thought, and then we can wrap up because we're moving into double overtime here. But this is great. It's been wonderful as usual. I know we could have spent a lot of time on this. There's this topic of the wrong pockets, right? Wrong pockets problem. So one program spends money to address a problem that doesn't directly affect them, but it might reduce, recidivism. It might affect, something else downstream a little bit. So the benefit to them is not direct, it's indirect. And that's from a systems perspective, all of those players together have a stake in the better outcomes, and none of them can accomplish that, successfully without really building on the work of somebody else, but they're not getting credit for it, and someone else is paying for it.
Right.
So I don't know if I've got a question or a statement in there, but I'm just thinking about how how do you present this to the larger world of the impact of this work, because it's not just linear. It's not like you do this and then you get that, right?
Yeah. So a number of ways to think about that. I mean, one way to think about that is certainly thinking about what's lost. And I would say probably I would challenge you to give me an example that I couldn't come up with this to show that actually you do lose something, right? It may not be the thing. So you may not lose the whatever the thing is at the end of the day, but there's something else that's being lost, and I'm gonna figure out what that is because there is a loss that happens even if visual benefit shows up someplace else. But the other thing is too, a part of it is at the point at which you're seeing the benefit payoff or the whatever it is at the end of the downstream, you can say, right? The benefit may show up downstream, right? Or the folks downstream that experience the loss, and the folks upstream don't have to pay for it. That you got to get folks together, mobilize the folks who are experiencing the cost, right? To get what I say talk about in the book as countervailing power to force folks upstream to address this issue.
Right.
And if you've got enough folks downstream able to do that, right, and you can act in unison, you can force folks further upstream to make those changes. But it requires the unison down here. And so the case making is not to the folks who are upstream. The folks who are here is what you want to talk about. And so sometimes, in the work that I do, I'll talk about mobilizing the bystanders, the folks who are actually not involved in it, but if they were to get involved, could represent a countervailing power as it relates to the folks that are holding the purse, but not sharing the resources that it would take to to move the mountain. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, it's exciting.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I think that's the intended vision of sort of a whole person care. It's like, are we touching all the pieces, and are we making sure that something is not negatively impacting us if we're another program, because it's not necessarily what we're paying for. So
yeah, and so you got to get folks right down. So let me just give an example of that, just in the way that I think about it, in the way that I've seen it happen. So we were asked to come in and help a group in Kentucky, Covington, Kentucky, who were working to build a shelter for folks who were homeless. And the part of the challenge was they had raised the money. They raised $5 million to get the shelter going and all, but they couldn't get city officials to zone for what they needed them to zone it for. They couldn't get them to zone. And the problem was the mayor, in other words, didn't want those folks, right? Congregating in their community. Their notion is, listen, if you build it, they will come. We already got enough homeless folks. We don't want to build something and then have more people than coming to our community because now we actually taking care of it. In the meantime, the folks in the community are saying, look, the homelessness problem is growing here. We don't want people on the street. But the policymakers didn't want to zone it because they didn't want to attract it. So a part of the initial conversation we had with the folks who were trying to build the shelter, they were trying to go after the city, and it just wasn't working to move policymakers. So we moved to a strategy to talk about who are the other folks, right, involved, who are deeply affected by that challenge where you are, and how can we exert accountability and pressure on policymakers. So one of the major players, one of the hospitals are saying, listen, folks, like these folks are coming in, there's no way to reimburse care, right? So all of this is out of pocket, but something's got to happen. Hospital, right? As long story short, the hospital actually stepped up, not only provided a space, but helped them to exert pressure on the mayor and other folks to get a location and to zone it in that way. But they had a strategy of also calling in some of the sheriff's department, right? Who would call every single time folks were like, get out on the street, blah, 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 blah. Like nobody gets into public service work because they want to be peeling people off the sidewalk 5 times a day because they're falling out in it, right? So they were able to get the sheriff's union, right, to lean forward and say, yeah, like, can we exert pressure? So they put together a little coalition of the willing, right, to move the mountain that was further upstream and to get the policymakers to move. So that's an example of, right, figuring out who's got a vested interest in it, whether they know it or not, who can be made to see their interest in it, and then can we together exert it, power in that way. I know we're super over time, but I hope that was helpful.
We got prizes for going over time. I appreciate you spending time and sharing with us. And I'm more excited to go back and looking at the book again and kind of getting into it as we sort of do the work here in this group here and try to make changes at scale in states and counties. And I suspect we'll be reaching out to you, and other folks will be reaching out to you as well. And we'll push out the message to folks who were not here today. I know a number of people were really interested in coming at conflict. So thank you so much again for making time. It's great to see you, and look forward to catching up with you. And in a couple of weeks, we'll see everybody back here. Thanks for our Michigan friends for showing up, and have a great rest of the day, everybody.
Woo. Thanks, everybody.
Ciao.
Thanks, y'all.